My name is Hamza, and before I tell you what happened to me, I need you to know one thing first. 4 years ago, I was kneeling in the dirt with my hands tied behind my back, and a man was standing over me with a blade, waiting for someone to give him the word to bring it down. I want you to hold that picture in your mind while I tell you the rest, because everything that happened before that night was leading me to that field. I'm not telling you a story I heard from someone else. This is my own life. This happened to me, to my wife, and to my daughter. I lived through every part of it, and today I am still here to tell it to you. I was born in a small town near the coast, in a quiet part of Malaysia where the days moved slow and everyone knew everyone else's name. My father worked as a teacher at the local religious school, and from the time I was very small, he was the one who taught me how to read the Quran properly, how to understand the Hadith, how to live a clean and correct life according to our faith. I was a quiet boy. I did not run around much like the other children in the street. I liked to sit near the old men after prayers and just listen to them talk about right and wrong, about law, about how a good man should carry himself in this world. By the time I finished my schooling, people already spoke of me as someone who had a serious mind for religious study. When I was 26, I became the Imam of our small mosque. I led the 5 daily prayers, I taught the younger boys their lessons, and every Friday I gave the sermon. People came from a distance just to hear me speak, and I will admit now, with some shame, that I liked the feeling of being respected in that way. I married a woman named Farah when we were both still young. Our families had known each other a long time, and she was a calm and patient woman who believed in me more than I sometimes believed in myself. For almost 9 years, we tried to have a child, and every year passed with nothing. We visited doctors in the city. We visited old women in the village who knew about herbs and remedies. We prayed, over and over, night after night. I never once told Farah how heavy this pain sat inside my chest, because I thought a man in my position was not allowed to show weakness like that. But there were nights I sat outside our house alone, looking up at the stars, quietly asking God why he would not give me this one simple thing. Then after 9 years, Farah became pregnant. When our daughter was born, I held her small body in my arms and I cried in front of the midwife without even trying to stop myself. We named her Nur, which means light, because that is exactly what she felt like to us after so many years of darkness. From that day forward, that little girl became the center of my whole world. As the years passed, my name traveled further than just our town. People from other villages started coming to ask me questions about their marriages, their businesses, their private struggles. I studied hard, and I was proud of how well I knew my religion. I was also, if I am honest, a proud man in general. Whenever I heard that some Christian group was holding a meeting nearby, I would go not to listen, but to stand at the back and wait for a chance to challenge the speaker in front of everyone. Many times the men could not answer my questions properly, and I would walk home feeling satisfied, like I had won something important. It was this same pride that made me go, one evening about 4 years ago, to a meeting a pastor was holding in the next town. I had heard strange talk about this man, that sick people were saying they got better after he prayed for them, that some Muslims had even quietly left our faith because of what he was teaching. I told myself someone needed to go and stop this before it spread into my own community, so I climbed on my motorbike and rode over there with the plan to sit quietly, listen carefully, and then stand and take his arguments apart in front of everyone. When I arrived, the meeting was already going on inside a rented hall, not a fancy place at all, just plastic chairs and a small stage. Maybe there were 200 people. I stood near the back with my arms folded, waiting for the moment to speak up. The pastor was a plain-looking man, nothing about him stood out, and he was telling a story about someone who had been sick for years and had gotten better after praying to Jesus. Inside myself, I almost laughed. I thought, this is just talk, just stories to make simple people feel hopeful. But then something happened that I was not ready for. As he kept speaking, I began to feel a heaviness building in my chest, like something was pressing down on me from somewhere inside. I told myself it was only tiredness from the long ride, but the feeling did not go away. It grew stronger. My hands started to shake a little, and my heart was beating faster than it should have been for a man just standing still. I did not understand what was happening in my own body, and it frightened me, because I am someone who is usually very much in control of himself. Then, without warning, the pastor stopped talking and looked straight toward the back of the room, straight at me. He said there was a religious teacher standing there that night, someone who had come to argue, but that there was a message waiting for him anyway. He said something about a wound in that man's heart that no book of law could ever heal. My whole body went cold. Nobody in that town knew who I was. I had never met this man before in my life. But somehow, in that moment, it felt like he was looking straight into the private rooms of my heart, rooms I had never shown to a single soul, not even my own wife. I did not say anything. I just stood there, frozen, feeling exposed in front of a room full of strangers. I rode home that night in complete silence. Farah asked how the meeting had gone, and I only told her it was strange, and then I went to bed without eating. I could not close my eyes. I kept turning his words over and over in my mind. How could he know about the wound I carried, about the years of waiting, about my father's death, and the quiet fear I still carried over whether his soul had found peace? I told myself it was probably just a coincidence, that maybe he said similar things to different people every night, hoping something would land on someone in the crowd. I tried hard to believe my own explanation, but somewhere underneath, I did not fully believe it. 2 weeks later, I went back. I told myself it was so I could gather more information to properly warn my own community about this man's tricks, but really, some part of me wanted to understand what had happened inside me that first night. This time the meeting was in an open field with a small wooden platform, and the crowd was even bigger, maybe 400 people. Again, I stood far at the back, hidden among the others. That night he spoke about a man who had been blind from birth and was healed, and about Jesus saying he was the light of the world. As I listened, that same heaviness pressed down on my chest again, even heavier this time, and then, without any warning at all, tears started falling down my face. I'm not a man who cries easily, and certainly never in front of strangers. I quickly wiped my face and looked around, embarrassed, but everyone else was watching the stage, not me. When he finished speaking, he invited anyone who wanted prayer to come forward. My legs began moving before my mind had agreed to it. It felt like something was pulling me forward gently against my own will. When I reached the front, he leaned close and spoke quietly, only for me to hear. He told me that Jesus saw the nights I had cried alone, the years I had asked why I had no child, and that he had never once left me, not even in my loneliest hour. I fell to my knees right there in that open field. I could not hold my tears back anymore. I wept like a small boy in front of strangers, in front of a faith I had spent my whole adult life standing against. He knelt beside me and prayed a simple prayer, quietly asking that the truth would be shown to my heart. I did not pray anything back that night. I only cried, feeling something old and heavy inside my chest starting to crack open. I went home a different man that night, though nobody around me knew it yet. I did not tell Farah what had happened. I was too confused and honestly too ashamed, because how could an imam explain to his own wife that he had wept at a Christian gathering? For weeks after that, I could not focus properly on my work. I would sit down to prepare my Friday sermon, and instead of verses from the Quran, thoughts about Jesus would fill my mind instead. I told myself this was some kind of test, a spiritual attack meant to check whether my faith was strong enough to survive it. I fasted extra days. I prayed extra prayers. Still, the thoughts stayed with me. One night, unable to sleep, I quietly opened my laptop and searched for information about Jesus, telling myself I only wanted to understand my opponent better so I could argue against him more effectively later. I read about his life, his teaching, the way he treated the poor and the sick, his death, and the claim that he rose again after 3 days. As a religious teacher, I already knew some of this, because our own scripture speaks about Isa, the name we use for Jesus, though our teaching says he did not die on the cross and that he was only a prophet, not the Son of God. But reading it that night with my own eyes in my own quiet room, something felt very different. I read the line where he said he was the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one could come to God except through him. My chest grew heavy again, the same feeling from those meetings. I closed the laptop, a little afraid of what I was feeling, and lay down next to my sleeping wife, staring at the ceiling until the sun came up. For almost 2 months I lived like this, torn quietly between two different worlds. In the daytime, I was the respected imam, teaching, leading prayers, appearing steady and sure of myself to everyone who saw me. But alone at night, I was a man full of questions I could not answer, full of a hunger I could not even properly name. I began going to the Christian meetings in secret, always sitting at the back, always leaving quickly before anyone could speak to me. I never told a single soul, not even my closest friends, because I was afraid of what they would think if they knew their own imam was quietly slipping off to listen to a Christian pastor. Then one evening, everything shifted completely. I was sitting alone in the small room behind our mosque, the room where I usually wrote my sermons, my Quran open in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to a line I had read where Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are tired and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest." I put my head down on the table, and without planning it, without any pastor near me, I spoke out loud, alone in that little room. I said something almost like a challenge, almost with a bit of anger in it, the way a tired man speaks when he just wants an answer, whatever that answer turns out to be. I asked, if Jesus was truly alive, if he was truly who they said he was, then he should show himself to me right then. I did not expect anything to happen, but as soon as I said it, the small room seemed to fill with a warmth I had never felt before in my whole life, as if a light had spread through it, even though the old lamp on the table had not changed at all. A peace moved through my whole body, starting somewhere in my chest and spreading down through my arms, my legs, up into my head. It was nothing like the peace I had felt after years of prayer and fasting. It was something else entirely. Tears started falling again, but this time they were not tears of confusion. They were tears of relief, like a man setting down a heavy bag he had been carrying on his back for years and years. In that quiet room, I whispered that if Jesus truly was alive, he should come into my life, forgive what needed forgiving, and I said out loud that I believed he was the Son of God. I did not fully understand every word coming out of my own mouth. I was not thinking about theology or the arguments I used to make against this faith. I was simply speaking from the deepest part of myself, the part that had been quietly searching for years without me ever knowing what it was even looking for. From that night on, I was a changed man, though no one around me knew it yet. I kept doing my duties as imam because I did not know what else to do with myself, but I was afraid, because I knew that if I told my community I now believed in Jesus, everything in my life would change, and not in a good way. In our region, when a Muslim leaves Islam for Christianity, it is seen as a very serious betrayal, sometimes punished harshly by the wider community. For about a week, I lived this quiet double life, reading the gospel late at night, praying to Jesus in secret, while during the day still performing my old duties, still pretending nothing had shifted inside me. I had not told Farah yet. I wanted to be sure first, to understand what was really happening in my own heart before I brought this heavy news to my family. Then on an ordinary afternoon, something happened that no father should ever have to go through. Our daughter Nur, who was 16 at that time, had gone with some other girls from the village to help gather firewood near the old quarry outside town, something the young people did often without any trouble. But that day, a section of loose ground gave way near the edge, and Nur fell a long way down among the rocks below. By the time the other girls ran back for help, too much time had already passed. I was in the middle of teaching a lesson at the mosque when a young man came running in, out of breath, shouting that there had been an accident at the quarry, that it was my daughter. My whole body went numb. I do not even remember the run there. I only remember arriving to find a small crowd of villagers gathered near the edge and seeing my daughter's body laid on the ground below, still, not moving at all. I pushed through and fell down beside her, calling her name, shaking her gently, begging her to open her eyes. Farah arrived only minutes later, and the sound she made when she saw our daughter is something I will carry for the rest of my life. We did everything we could. Someone who knew a little first aid tried to help. We got her to the small clinic in town, and from there to the hospital in the city, but by the time we arrived, the doctors confirmed what we already knew in our hearts. Our Nur was gone. Our only child, the one we had waited 9 long years for, was dead. I do not remember much of the hours after that. I remember holding her in that hospital room, refusing to let go while the nurses gently tried to explain what needed to happen next. I remember Farah on the floor, unable to hold herself up from the weight of it. I remember the drive home in complete silence, her head against the window, her eyes empty from crying too much. That night, alone in a small room at the hospital, while arrangements were being made, something happened inside me that I still find hard to fully explain. All the peace I had felt just days before, all the warmth and hope that had entered my heart, felt like it was being crushed under this new weight I could not bear. I was angry. I was confused. I felt tricked, like this new faith I was only just discovering had handed me nothing but false hope right before the worst thing I had ever known struck me down. I remembered reading about Jesus bringing a girl back to life, about his friend Lazarus walking out of a tomb after 4 days. And in my grief, in that small room, I stood up, and with my fists shaking, I spoke out loud into the empty room. I said that if he was truly alive, if what I had read was true, if he truly had power over death, then he needed to prove it to me right then. I told him he had given me hope only days earlier, that he had made me believe, and now he needed to show me, to bring my daughter back if she was truly alive somewhere with him. I told him that if he did not, I would know it was all a lie, and I would go back to my old life and never speak his name again. It was not a calm prayer. It was a broken, angry challenge thrown into the dark by a man who felt he had nothing left to lose. After I said it, I sat back down, completely worn out, and eventually fell asleep still sitting in that chair. The next day we began preparing for the burial, as our tradition requires it to happen quickly. Relatives and neighbors came to offer their condolences. My own father, now an old man himself, came to sit with me, though he was overwhelmed with his own grief for his only grandchild. The whole village was in mourning together, because losing an only child after so many years of waiting is a pain that a whole community feels, not just a family. It was during a small gathering at our home, the day before the burial, that everything changed again. Nur's body had been placed respectfully in a room, wrapped according to our custom, waiting for the final rites. I was sitting outside on the steps, completely emptied out, with no tears left in me, when Farah came running out of the house screaming. But this scream was different from the one the day before. She was calling my name, telling me to come quickly, that something was happening. I ran into the room where our daughter's body lay, my heart pounding, not understanding anything. And there, in front of my own eyes, in front of 2 relatives who had been sitting quietly beside her, my daughter's chest moved. It moved again. Then her eyes opened. And she took a deep, gasping breath, the way someone breathes after being held underwater far too long. The room erupted. Someone screamed. Someone else nearly fell over from shock. Farah threw herself onto our daughter, sobbing, calling her name over and over. I stood frozen at the doorway, unable to move, staring at my child, who only a day before had been declared dead by doctors and prepared for burial, and who was now sitting up, confused, looking around at all the crying adults around her. Nur, still very weak, looked over at me and said something that made the whole room go quiet. She told me she had been somewhere very bright, that she had seen a man there with marks on his hands, and that he had told her it was not her time yet. She said he told her to tell me that he had heard what I said in the hospital room and that he was alive. I fell to my knees right there, unable to hold myself up any longer. My daughter, who could not have known one single word of what I had said alone in that hospital room, was telling me about a man with marks on his hands who had heard my challenge and answered it. Word spread through our village faster than I could have imagined. Within hours, people were gathering outside our home, some out of curiosity, some out of fear, some out of genuine wonder, because everyone had seen her body the day before, had seen with their own eyes that she was truly gone. And now here she was, sitting up, drinking water, asking for her mother. That night, once the crowds had finally gone and our house was quiet again, I sat beside my sleeping daughter, watching her breathe, and I wept. But this time, it was completely different from all the crying before. These were the tears of a man whose whole world had just been turned over in a single day. I turned to Farah, who was still sitting there in shock, and I told her everything. I told her about the meetings I had secretly attended, about the pastor's words that seemed to know my private pain without me ever telling a soul. I told her about the night in the little room and the warmth that filled it, about the angry challenge I threw out in that hospital room out of grief. Farah listened in silence, tears sliding down her face the whole time. When I finished, she said something I did not expect. She said our daughter was alive because of this Jesus, and asked how we could possibly not believe now. That night, with our daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, My wife and I knelt together and prayed to Jesus, both of us giving our hearts to him fully, asking him to be the center of our lives from that point on. A week later, once Nur was strong enough to understand what had happened to her, she prayed the same prayer with us, giving her own young life to the one who had appeared to her and brought her back from death. The three of us were now, in our hearts, followers of Jesus, even while I was still publicly known across the region as a respected imam. For a few months, I tried to move carefully, trying to understand how to live with this new life growing inside me. I kept some of my duties going while quietly deepening my new faith at home, praying with my family at night, reading a gospel a Christian friend from the meetings had given me. But it became harder and harder to keep living this way. My heart no longer wanted to preach things I no longer believed. During Friday prayers, I found I could not speak against Christianity the way I once had. People in the community started to notice the change in me, the way I no longer spoke with the same fire, the way I seemed distracted, quieter than before. Eventually, word reached some of the religious leaders in the wider area that I had been seen at Christian gatherings, and that rumors were spreading about my daughter's death and return to life being connected to this new faith. Disturbed by what they were hearing, and worried about what my reputation might do if the story spread further, a group of them decided to come and confront me directly. 6 men came to my home one evening, some of them old friends and colleagues, and they asked me to explain what they had heard. By that point, I was tired of hiding. I felt in my heart that I could not deny what had happened in my own family, so I told them everything. From the very first meeting, I only attended to argue, all the way to my daughter's death and her return. I told them I now believed in Jesus as the Son of God, and that I could not go back to denying something I had witnessed with my own eyes. Some of the men wept, feeling their old friend had been led astray by something dangerous. Others turned cold, warning me that this kind of talk could bring serious trouble, not just for me, but for my whole family. They gave me 1 week to publicly take it back and return fully to our old faith, or there would be consequences. I barely slept that week. My wife and I prayed constantly, asking for strength and for wisdom. Some old friends stopped speaking to us the moment they heard the rumors. Some of my own relatives would no longer even visit our home. The pressure was heavier than anything I had ever carried, heavier even than losing our daughter, because this was a pressure that threatened to tear apart every relationship I had ever known. When the week ended, the same men came back, along with several others, and the mood was far more serious than before. They asked me one last time to take back my new faith in front of everyone gathered. I stood in front of my own house, with Farah and Nur standing behind me, and I looked at these men who used to be my friends, and I told them, calmly but firmly, that I could not deny what I had seen with my own eyes, that my daughter had died and was alive again because of Jesus, and that I would not lie about what had happened to my own family. What happened after that is still hard for me to speak about, even now, though it also showed me something about the God I had come to serve. They took me from my own home that same night, tying my hands, forcing me into a vehicle, while Farah screamed and tried to stop them, while Nur cried, holding on to her mother, watching her father being dragged into the darkness. They brought me to an open field outside town, a place sometimes used for public gatherings, and word spread quickly that a former imam who had turned away from his faith was going to be made an example of that night. A crowd gathered, some angry at what they saw as a great betrayal, some drawn only by the terrible curiosity that pulls people toward tragedy. They forced me down onto my knees, my hands tied tightly behind me, and a man stood over me holding a blade, waiting for someone to give the signal. This was the darkest moment of my whole life, kneeling there in the cold night air, hearing the low murmur of the crowd around me, feeling the rope cutting into my wrists. I thought of my wife's face, of my daughter's laugh, and I wondered if this really was the end for me. But even in that terrible moment, something surprising happened in my heart. Alongside the fear, a strange, quiet peace began to rise up inside me, the same peace I had felt that first night, alone in the small room behind the mosque. I began to pray silently, not asking for my life to be spared, only telling him that whatever happened that night, I knew he was with me, just as he had been with my daughter when she was gone from us. The man holding the blade raised it above me, and the crowd fell quiet, waiting for what was coming. And in that exact moment, something happened that no one there could explain, not that night, and not even years later when they tried to talk about it among themselves. A light, far brighter than anything natural, suddenly filled that open field, so bright that people cried out and covered their eyes. The man holding the blade dropped it suddenly, his hand shaking, and he fell backward onto the ground as if pushed by something unseen. Several others near the front fell as well, some of them saying afterward that they felt struck by something powerful, though no one had touched them. In the confusion, with people shouting and some running off, afraid something dangerous was happening in front of them, I felt the rope around my wrists loosen on its own, as though the knot had simply come undone without any hand touching it. I did not wait to understand it. With my hands free, I got up and ran into the darkness, away from the confused crowd, my heart pounding, hardly believing I was still breathing. I ran until my legs gave out, and I collapsed near a small stream outside town, shaking from both fear and shock. It was there, alone in the dark, that I finally let myself cry, not from sadness this time, but from a relief and gratitude I had never known before. I knew without any doubt left in me that Jesus had saved my life that night in a way no ordinary explanation could ever cover. Word of what happened spread quickly through the area, in many different versions. Some who witnessed it began quietly saying maybe there really was something to this Jesus I spoke of, since something clearly beyond explanation had stopped my execution right in front of their eyes. Others grew even more afraid and angry, unwilling to accept anything that challenged what they believed, and they continued to see me and my family as a danger and an embarrassment. That same night, I found my way to the home of the pastor, whose meetings had first stirred something in my heart months earlier. He and his small congregation took me in, hid me for a few days, and got word to Farah, who quickly gathered what she could, and with Nur beside her joined me in hiding. For our safety, we eventually had to leave our home village completely, moving to a different part of the country where no one knew us, starting a new and much quieter life together. Even though we lost our home, our community, many of our old relationships, and I lost the respected position I once held, I can tell you honestly today that what we gained was worth more than everything we lost. My wife, my daughter, and I have continued to grow in our faith together, quietly worshipping with a small group of other believers in our new area, still careful, because the danger of being found out never fully disappears in some parts of our country. My daughter Nur, now a young woman, often tells others, when it is safe to do so, about the bright place she saw when she was gone, about the man with marks on his hands who told her it was not her time yet. She says she is no longer afraid of death, because she has already seen a small glimpse of what waits on the other side, and she knows it is something good. My wife Farah, who was once simply the quiet wife of a respected imam, has become a strong woman of faith in her own right, often the one who comforts other new believers we meet, especially women who left Islam and are struggling with the loss of family that so often comes with that decision. She tells them the pain is real, the loss is real, but the peace she has found is something she would never trade back for her old life. And I, the imam who once rode out to argue against Christian pastors, who was once so sure of my old beliefs, now spend my time quietly teaching a small group of believers from many different backgrounds, many of them, like me, having come from Muslim families and having paid a heavy price for their choice to follow Jesus. When I share my story from the beginning, from that first strange heaviness in my chest, at a meeting I only came to argue against, all the way to the night a blade was raised over my head, and a light from somewhere beyond this world saved my life in front of a whole crowd of witnesses, I always tell people the hardest part was not losing my daughter, even though that was the deepest pain a father could ever carry. I tell them the hardest part was the moment I had to decide, in my own heart, whether I truly believed enough to lose everything for it. I tell them that the night I knelt with my hands tied, waiting for the blade to fall, was the night I finally understood that my faith was no longer something I had simply accepted because of one miracle. It had become something real inside me, something I was willing to hold on to, even if it cost me my very last breath. Today, years after that terrible and wonderful night, my wife, my daughter, and I still follow Jesus together, quietly, carefully, but with a certainty that nothing can shake anymore. We have faced more difficulty than most people ever have to face in a lifetime, difficulty that cost us our home, our reputation, many of the people we loved, and nearly cost me my life. But I can tell you today, without hesitation, that I would make the same choice again every single time, because I found something that no amount of suffering could ever take from me. My story continues quietly today, in a small corner of this country, far from the village where I once led prayers as a respected imam. I once knelt in a mosque leading others in a faith I no longer follow, and now I kneel with my family in prayer to Jesus. I once challenged pastors to defend my old religion, and now I help lead others toward the very faith I used to fight against. My daughter once lay still before my own eyes, and now she lives to tell others about the light she saw beyond this world. My wife once only supported my old position in the community, and now she stands as a source of strength for other believers walking this same hard, but in the end, beautiful road we have walked together. This is my testimony, and for as long as I have breath in this life, I will keep telling it to anyone willing to listen.